Yeah, we thought it would be a great idea to film a documentary looking at 50 years of PSI and to celebrate everything that we had. And as psychologists, sometimes people think that we can predict the future and read minds, and certainly none of us saw this coming. And we were so excited last year to be able to celebrate our 50 years, to celebrate with each other, to be together and to be around each other and to celebrate all that we've done. And then, as we all know, 15 months later, COVID happened and all of our realities changed. And it hasn't been an easy time for anybody. There were a lot of events that we hoped would happen, including the filming of this and the showing and screening of this and all the social bits that would go with that and our 50th anniversary conference. And I think what we've had to do, like everybody else in the world, is adapt. And adapting can be hard, especially when everything is ever changing. And PSI and what we do, we're all volunteers, and we do this in our own time. And we've had a difficult year, certainly working in mental health, trying to support ourselves and support the population and people and be parents and husbands and dads and brothers. But I think we adapted as best we could, and I think we've survived. And I think maybe that's the thing that we'll take from this, is that we're able to adapt no matter what the circumstances. So now that we're all here watching this together, finally we've got to the point where we can be together, we can spend time together, we can enjoy the 50 years. It's been a little bit delayed, but from my point of view, it's worth it. So sit back, enjoy, and let's see what the next 50 years brings for us.
I'm extremely proud to be involved in the PSI. You know, and when I look back at the history of the PSI, I see that it's been involved in all these major milestones in Irish society. You know, very often it's in the background. You know, we don't know it's working away there. But if you go back and you look through the history of the PSI, it's been a guiding hand in a lot of really important social history, Irish social history throughout the last 50 years.
I'm delighted that we set up the Psychological Society of Ireland. I'm thrilled and proud, and I've been watching over the years at the wonderful things you're all doing.
PSI means family, and it means a community, and it's a very, very knowledgeable community. It's a very holding community.
It's great to have a home within psychology that all of the various domains of professional psychology can live.
It feels like living. It feels like that's what it's about. It feels like it's giving you as much, if not more, than you're giving away.
It's not every day you get the opportunity to work anywhere where you know that everything you're doing is going to have a positive impact on other people's lives.
It's great you meet people from a wide number of areas of psychology. You share ideas. It gives you energy and it helps to motivate you. And I think there's a great buzz in the society.
Being a member of the society has, I suppose, opened up a world to me where I can make connections with other psychologists.
I want to support people, to empower people to find their own voice.
I'm very proud of PSI, and I'm very glad that when I came to Ireland that I was encouraged to join PSI.
It has gone in a flash, so to speak. It seems only yesterday since PSI was set up. And as Martin McHugh, the first president, said, bliss was it in that dawn to be alive.
Psychology is of so much interest to anyone and everyone. Anyone who is human or interacts with other humans is interested in that. Even the ones who don't are interested in why that's interesting. It's become part of the language of everyone now, whereas I think probably 50 years ago it was a foreign language. Now it's very much embraced in the culture and society in which we live.
So I think it means when we celebrate, and I'm here to celebrate 50 years of PSI, I'm also here to celebrate what's happened in Ireland over the last 50 years and how we've contributed to that. So 50 years ago, the marriage ban, homosexuality, abortion, we've grown up with that. We've grown kind of out of that and have shaped that. And that's what I'm most proud of.
part of what we do is about reflection. It's about the opportunity to take stock and look back and how have things been, what have we learned, what have we done well, what have we done not so well. Reflection is a part of everything we do. But there is something special about 50, that number. Any organisation which is driven by volunteers, surviving and thriving and achieving for 50 years is worth marking.
In the last 50 years, we've took on intellectual disability rights, marriage referendums, repealed the 8th Amendment, gay rights, women's rights, disability rights. The Psychological Society has stood up and grabbed those issues and not been afraid to voice the science behind the evidence.
So when each societal change occurs and each challenge occurs, it is the same for us as psychologists and people to decide, how do we respond? Do we respond? Do we stay silent because we think that maybe is in the greater good? Do we put a position forward? So because we are a collection of over 3,000 psychologists, you're going to get a really diverse range of opinions, and we're not always going to agree and feel like, yes, we are one unified voice. So at times when we've looked at things like the 8th Amendment, we stuck to the facts. We knew it was an incredibly divisive societal issue that was there, and we thought long and hard about, do we say anything at all? But again, we're an organisation based on evidence and what's there. And we heard in the public and public domain things being said that were far from evidential. And we felt this was a moral responsibility to use that voice, to point out, here's what the evidence is. We thought for a while and toyed back and forward, do we take a formal position? And in the beginning we said no, we'll just say what the evidence is. But the evidence leaned so strongly in one way, we thought, why aren't we saying, have the courage of our convictions?
My memory at PSI, was first taking a position in the divorce referendum. There was divided views. I think the organisation was able to largely hold that and contain that. And that was a really good example, the organisation being vocal and taking a position on something, whether people agreed with it or not, but certainly being involved in public discourse.
PSI has actually addressed a lot of the major issues of our time. We've looked at a place to live where people with disabilities should live. We've looked at discipline in schools. We've looked at penal reform. We've looked at divorce. We've looked at same-sex marriage. We've looked at the repeal of the 8 and abortion. And we've made statements on all of those based on the evidence that's available.
Today, psychologists wouldn't recognise either psychology or Irish society. And what's interesting about that is, if you go back 50 years, we didn't even have the language to articulate some of the things we talk about today.
I suppose you could hardly say psychology was a bit primitive at that time, but it probably was in Ireland. People hadn't heard of it, and it was the beginning of learning techniques, particularly to help children who had learning difficulties or other kinds of difficulties, and also for adults, adult clinical psychology.
I suppose when it started off, psychology was focused on child guidance clinics for the most part, in terms of practitioners now offering a service. Martin McHugh certainly was one of those key significant figures, as was Seamus McLuhan, as was Trace Brady, as was many others. But they were certainly to the forefront in the establishment of psychology in Ireland.
1960s was a kind of a decade of promise, and for example, the report of the Commission of Inquiry on Mental Handicap came out in 1965, and a year later the report of the Commission of Inquiry on Mental Illness. And both of them envisaged, as it were, an increased and an important role for psychologists in providing in these services. And there was also a report at the end of that decade on industrial schools and reformatories. And we had a psychologist represented on that commission. When I came to Galway to work as a psychologist in a new job in 1967, I felt very isolated. The nearest neighbour I had as a psychologist was either Dublin on the east or Cork in the west. So there was very little kind of support from colleagues. There was no career structure, there was no recognised salary scales, and we had nobody, as it were, to represent the interests of psychology and psychologists in relation to departments, the departments of state, policy makers of different kinds, and so on. We became aware that somebody needs to represent our interests and so on, and our ideas to policymakers, the Department of Education, the Department of Health, and so on.
Well, it was very exciting in the early days because psychology was rather new in Ireland, and we were well aware that there is no way that the Department of Education or Health would listen to anything we said, because we were members of the British Psychological Society, and times were different then, and a few of us thought, well, look, we're never going to get anywhere under the British Psychological Society.
Things were changing. Change was in the air in a big way. But yet, setting up the PSI was a big step forward, but it was necessary. Of course, psychology was seen by some other professions as a kind of an upstart.
Because we were new and young and enthusiastic, there was nothing that we didn't think we could do. Look at it. And at our meetings, I remember at the beginning, there was one person in the group who was rather seriously, shall we say, Christian. And she thought that she would start the meeting as a chairman by blessing herself and saying a prayer. And one of the other fellows nearly erupted. He said, sorry, he said, you can't do that, that's not appropriate. He said, that's only for Catholics. So she was fiercely embarrassed, but she didn't do it anymore.
And it was a very exciting time, actually, to be involved in psychology as a whole. It was new to the country. It was part of the 1960s feeling. I know it was 1970 when PSI was set up.
Actual first sort of meeting to start the society was in my apartment in Rathmines, and everybody sort of suddenly was very enthusiastic from the word go. There was really excitement in there. Everybody, without a hint of change or aberration or anything, instantly said they thought it was a great idea. And a lot of support from professors and so on the quiet. One of the professors, Professor Nolan, he was UCD. He said to me, when I told him I was thinking about it, he said, Creena, go and do it, it's a great idea, and do it before you become famous, you see. So I said, I'm not going to become famous, thanks very much. I'm not interested in becoming famous. But will it work? He said, yes, he said, because the three of you who are setting out to do it, he said, you're not well known, you're well thought of among your colleagues and staff, he said, so now is a very good time to do it.
We set up a working party to develop the idea of a society. We got approval for that at a general meeting, and then we set about producing a constitution. My two colleagues that I started off with, Therese Brady, she was a tremendous organizer. She had a great way of persuading people to be as energetic and as keen as herself. And Creena Garvey looked after our finances and kept us in budget, and also had a great sense of humour. The meeting that eventually agreed to accept the constitution that we proposed was a very large one. It had 96 members present. I think there was a great sense of satisfaction that all these difficulties had been overcome, and a great sense that we had a bright future ahead of us as a society.
The founders of the Psychological Society of Ireland could easily have hitched their star or their wagon to our bigger brothers and sisters across the Irish Sea. It's to their great credit that they recognised that we're not British, we have our own unique culture in this country, and so therefore we have our own unique cultural expression. And that, I think, as the years have gone on, we see that in the Psychological Society of Ireland. In fact, if you look at the Irish name for the society, it's Cumann Síochálatha Éireann, which gives us at least our own separate and unique cultural identity. And I think that throughout the years we have reflected who we are as a people.
Up until the 80s, all you required to have to work as a psychologist in the health service or in education was a basic degree in psychology. And we as psychologists were very aware that that wasn't enough to equip you to meet the challenges that were needed. And then in 1987, we introduced the Society's Directive on Postgraduate Training, where people entering the health service for the first time were required to have specialist postgraduate professional training. At that time, it was all in clinical psychology, but since then it has expanded to many areas.
As PSI became a more respected body, its voice would be harder to dismiss.
The PSI was born in the early 1970s by professionals who had been trained in the 50s and 60s. And Ireland has changed so much in the half century since all of that took place. It was inevitable that eventually the PSI, especially among all the professional bodies, would find itself having to face up and to a mature decision on a major social issue of the day.
I think one of the most important things that the Society did was, in the early 80s, was produce a document called A Place to Live. That was a document that advocated that people with disabilities ought to live in the community and that we ought to stop building institutions. When we published the document back in 81, there was an outcry. There was an outcry from the bodies that represented disability services. They believed that the place for people with disabilities was institutions. We were strongly opposed to that. Strangely, 30 years later, we're now looking at that same body, which back in 1980 was called the National Association for the Mentally Handicapped, has now turned around 180 degrees and calls itself Inclusion Ireland. So it really has adopted the message that we made in 1981, that people with disabilities ought to live in the community and that we should close institutions.
In 2002, the government introduced the 25th Amendment to the Constitution Bill. Actually, they introduced it in 2001, but the vote took place in 2002. And this attempted, among other things, to remove the risk of suicide as grounds for illegal abortion in Ireland. And essentially what this was doing, it was saying to women and to their families in Ireland that if you are at risk of suicide, that is not significant in comparison to if you're at risk of a physical illness. And as psychologists, regardless of views on social issues, the idea that mental health and suicide should be seen as trivial in comparison to physical health was something that would be of great concern to us as a group of psychologists. There was a fear around the council table that psychologists should not be seen to take a stand on abortion for social and cultural reasons. And we would go so far as to say that suicide should be included as grounds for legitimate abortion because it's equivalent to physical danger. But we are not going to tell you whether or not to vote yes or no to a proposal to do precisely that.
In 2018, I was the chair of the Special Interest Group for Perinatal and Infant Mental Health. And it was agreed among our members that we would put together a paper on the 8th. There isn't a lot of research on this topic, but we did find a really comprehensive review done by the American Psychological Association in 2008. It showed categorically that there was no negative effects of abortion and mental health, and that overwhelmingly what people felt when they had chosen termination of pregnancy was relief.
Some people had said that members of the society may not like this, and that we would have people criticizing the society and even resigning from the society. I made the point, so be it.
I remember it was about 2 weeks before the referendum, getting a phone call. I was in Canada at the time and getting a phone call from Lisa Stafford saying, we're going ahead and we're publishing this. And not only are we publishing this, but we're also going to support the yes vote.
We put together a document, we looked at all the research. We were, ultimately looking at presenting both sides of an argument, if you like, but actually ultimately all the research was demonstrating that there was really only one option in terms of supporting the repeal of the 8th Amendment, because psychologically and emotionally, it was never going to be, when you're thinking about termination, which is never an easy decision to come to, it was never the actual act of a termination that was going to impact on a woman's emotional, psychological well-being. It was everything that surrounded that. It was the stigma, it was the secrecy, it was having to travel to another country for medical care, it was the trauma of all of that, and it was living with that, and the idea of this being a shame for somebody was going to potentially impact them potentially for the rest of their lives.
Final straw really was public opinion. I think it became clear that if every professional society in the country, however Catholic or not they were, felt they had that there was a professional responsibility to make a statement about suicide. I mean, suicide is one of those fundamental issues of mental health, that how could a psychological society not say anything?
I think key things we were saying is that, that the perinatal period is a period when most deaths related to mental health occur in women. So we knew it was a very sensitive time. For me too, I was saying, if PSI is going to have the courage of its convictions, history will judge us. And are we going to be silent again? Or are we going to speak? And it was quite clear that we should speak. I felt it was morally the right thing to do. Integrity is one of our values. We enshrine our values. We talk about promoting our vision and our mission for society. So why wouldn't we?
I was doubly overjoyed to know that our paper was going to get published. The media picked up on our paper, and also that the PSI were supporting a yes vote. That was overwhelming to me.
I think as PSI president, and indeed just as an individual, a member of Irish society, PSI taking a position on the 8th Amendment was huge for me. I know what it feels like to be in a part of Irish society that is discriminated by structurally and institutionally, legally, and to have organisations like PSI stay silent on that. I have personal experience of that, so to have been president, whilst we were able to use our voice, take ownership of our voice and use it in that way was phenomenal.
There was a sense of women being able to make choices around their own bodies, and also make wise choices. Sometimes there was a narrative that people would suddenly, every woman would be going to have a termination, and that's just not what happens. To trust in people's capacity to know what's best for themselves it was really lovely to be part of that movement, I suppose. And I've subsequently moved in to work in the area of perinatal mental health, and to be able to work with women who are able to openly say, yes, I had a termination and it was the right decision for me, and I don't regret it, and I'm glad that I was able to get my care here in this country and not have to travel. I feel really proud to have been a very small part of that.
I was very proud of the society at that moment. And of course, the media coverage was significant. So all the national media covered the PSI position, unlike in 2002, when the society had prevaricated and had therefore absented itself from the public square.
One of the things that's come out of that for us is we have put structures in place so that we can kind of very quickly move on things. We've strengthened our science and public policy group. We've strengthened our ability to kind of face the media and face the public. On reflection, yes, we need to integrate and develop more structures around that, but I would stand over that decision and I would do the same thing tomorrow.
I was working at the time in St. Vincent's in oncology, and there was a colleague, another psychologist, who was in for treatment, and I went to say hello, and she said to me, it was 2014, and she said to me, you know what I've just realised? And I said, what? And she said, you're going to be president during the marriage equality campaign. And I can remember vividly thinking, oh fuck. I'm terrified, I'm excited, and I hadn't quite put it together. Because in some way, I mean, I was whatever age I was at the time, but in some way I knew that I could no longer hide professionally or publicly. I knew that I'd have to take a stand and a public stand. And in some ways, I was probably up to that point some way some way kind of still closeted. I mean, I was the first openly gay president of PSI, the president of a professional body that colluded with the criminalisation of homosexuality, that colluded with the pathologising of gay and lesbian people.
I was one of the signatories of the 300 people to the Irish Times, the Independent, for the marriage referendum. It was a polemic in society, and there was academic psychologists saying yay or nay, pro and con. I remember providing the amicus curiae that the APA provided to the courts in I think it was California at the time, to support that there wasn't a bias of same-sex parents having children and the effect on children.
Then Taoiseach came and launched some of her documentation around that as well.
It was kind of, I suppose, around that time, a kind of an outpouring of interest in social issues. And a special interest group was formed, sexual diversity and gender issues, which was covering LGBTQI issues. And also there was a ethnic and cultural diversity group, and then there was the working group. So all of a sudden there was these groups within PSI that were supported by PSI, had roles in PSI, had all the background support from the administrator and so forth, able to meet and do all this work on training and education and public policy. So I obviously, Claire Cullen founded the special interest group in Maynooth in 2008, and I joined and then became chair in 2010. We had quite a lot of different goals, but the main goal was to produce guidelines for good practice with LGBT clients. That took about 5 years. And we formed a working group. We consulted with Tenny and Glenn, which were the main advocacy groups. We drafted and did the research and finally pulled it together and got approval from the special interest group, and then it had to go to the council, and it got approved by council. And just through the process of time, it ended up being completed in 2014, getting approval, ready for launch just in early 2015, which was just in time for the marriage equality referendum. So that was a great moment to be launching the guidelines anyway, because it was a really important thing to do, but to be launching it at a time, coincidentally, when there was about to be a referendum, and we could be part of just producing this very comprehensive set of guidelines that were basically saying LGBT people are equal and deserve equality. And of course that fitted completely with the message of marriage equality. So it was a moment of synchrony, I suppose.
So the marriage referendum was, I suppose, a very big moment for PSI, very big moment for me, and it also coincided with my shift from being an ordinary member to coming on to the council, or the kind of executive council of PSI in my first year. And I suppose my attitude then and probably now is very much kind of dive in, apologise later if at all, and just kind of get things done. And I suppose where I was sitting in, the boardroom, there was 20, 30 years of experience there, far more than me. And in those voices, there were people who were saying, we need to take a stand on this, we need a message, we need it to be clear. Other people kind of thinking, well, not every member maybe supports this. Not every member will be happy, we need to represent everyone. And it was just such an interesting time how, my own views on that this was something we needed to be strong about, this was something that, and I probably would have had the mindset that if someone doesn't, support this as a member, are these the members that we want? And again, I suppose when you're looking at an organisational view, you have to look a little bit broader than that. You can have to say, well, look, we can represent all views, we don't have to agree with them.
So 2019 was nearly 5 years after the development of our LGBT guidelines. So guidelines for practitioners on how to engage meaningfully and respectfully with members of the lesbian, gay, bisexual and trans community. Interestingly, in that 5 years, we had started talking about LGBTQ plus LGBTQI. We had become so aware of the challenges that people face when they connect with a group that maybe they feel are disadvantaged, disenfranchised, disrespected. In another group within the society, we were talking about how could we mark social issues within the Irish Psychologist. So that opportunity to mark a moment, but to learn from that moment around such an important issue, as the well-being of any group within society. I was really pleased to be able to celebrate that in such a visual way as the cover of the IP.
Looking back from 50 to 40, I think the councils and the presidents and the management of the society have done a fantastic job. I think they've made it a very mature professional organisation. It has a good sense of its own identity now, I think, and it is able to influence governmental policy. It's more confident in pushing for mental health awareness and understanding of psychology and how we can help broader society, patients, and its own membership. The methods of interacting with the membership and with the public have changed. So now we're using social media, we're using Twitter to interact. Usually that wasn't available, we didn't do it. We had emails and newsletters and the brochure and the magazine. So even within that 10-year span, the way in which we're able to start reaching people, reaching the public, reaching society and reaching our membership has changed dramatically.
And I suppose one of the challenges at present is that statutory registration, legal registration, we're sort of waiting for that to come on board.
The PSI will be a kind of clearinghouse or a provider into the future. It won't have, once CORU is established and once practitioners become answerable to that body, that will no longer be the brief of PSI. So we do have to generate a whole new way of being.
We've got a group, a society that will help psychologists to work on continuing professional development, liaise with each other, meet with each other, go to conferences. There's still a big role for the society.
I suppose the moment I felt I could really embrace the PSI and really be part of it was that conference in 2008 when the Policy on Equality and Inclusive Practice was launched by Rosalie McInvaney, who was then the president. And a group was set up, Equality and Inclusive Practice Working Group. And it was like, I actually was so proud and so delighted and so able to feel 100% part of PSI at that time. That I could say the word thrilled. I was actually thrilled to be at that moment in that group, in that big gathering with all these people who are just totally behind this whole idea that we must look at equality and inclusive practice and take diversity on board.
Something that I'm really struck by about PSI and about the work that's done within the society by the divisions and special interest groups is that it is by and large done by people who are working in a voluntary capacity, and it really makes me value being a member of society. It gives it that real community feel that we're working together to advance our profession and to ensure the best quality of psychological care for the people that we work with.
I see psychology in Ireland as a very broad church, be that from student, whether a first-year undergrad to a postdoc, whether that be the wider academic community and all their own specialisations, or whether it's the wide array of practitioners who are practicing throughout the country. So in that sense, it's quite a broad church.
Great discipline to be in. It can be a long road. There's a lot of training involved, but there's a lot of knowledge to acquire over the last 100 or so years of science developing. But it's a very flexible career. You can, as a young person developing into psychology, if you're enthusiastic, if you're inquisitive, if you like people, and if you like science, it's a great combination because you can combine all those things together in a day job. You can work with people, you can help make people better, improve people's lives, but also contribute to the science of the field as well.
Psychology is an extraordinarily popular degree in Ireland. There's been a huge upsurge in the number of students registered for honours psychology courses. I think partly it's because psychology is such an adaptable discipline. It reaches out into areas like business, healthcare.
I started off doing a degree in biotechnology, which was about as far removed from this as you could get, and just really got drawn towards it. Didn't really know what a psychologist did, met some good people who kind of inspired me, and
then moved into this area and I've just loved it ever since.
PSI play a central part in the development of the doctoral programme in clinical psychology. Along with the BPS, they accredited it and have continued to accredit it on regular 5-year intervals over the past 20 years. So that's pretty important. The other thing is that the division of clinical psychology, or the division of clinical psychology within the PSI, has been exceptionally supportive of our programme, and indeed graduates of our programme have become members of the division of clinical psychology and played key roles within that. So there's been a really close link between the UCD course and PSI. And the other strand of that is our link, the link of PSI and our programme with the Public Health Service. Because the development of our programme, which was accredited by the PSI, the development of that has gone hand in hand with the development of psychology services within the National Public Health Service, the HSE. So I would see those the university, the society and the health service as working hand in hand in the development of a service to help people.
There's just lots of little bits to it, for me. I think even in thinking about talking to a surgeon a year or two ago, and he was saying, look, I don't know what you psychologists do. He said, like, we have one on our team, I don't know why, but you seem to talk to the kids before they go into surgery and they recover quicker, they're out of hospital, they don't need to be readmitted. I don't know what magic hocus pocus thing you say to them. Now he was a friend, he was being facetious. We had a conversation about it, and it was really this sense that if you can make sense of things, then you're better able to deal with them.
Working in an acute hospital where disease and death are seen as failures, where you kind of check in a hospital with your disease and you're expected to leave every other part of you at home or in the car park. And psychologists that I see working and work with across acute hospitals are really doing an enormously transformative job in trying to change the culture that exists in our acute hospitals or in our healthcare.
What I love about psychology is the almost limitless possibilities of the discipline to let you study everything from, challenging areas like stress and coping up to how people thrive and flourish. It's that continuum from challenge to achievements and everything in between.
You can have, within the umbrella of psychology, a discussion about brain biochemistry, brain structure, alongside much more kind of philosophical or kind of metaphysical issues. It's an extraordinarily versatile, adaptable course, and employers value some of the skills that come with a psychology graduate.
What has happened is psychology has opened up now, and there's work in organisational psychology, sports psychology, so that psychology now has opened up a great number of specialities.
I'm very lucky and fortunate that I'm working in the area that I love. I'm an organisational psychologist and coaching psychologist, and what I love about it is that you're able to help people on a day-to-day basis, and you're able to really impact long-term change for people and organisations in terms of where I work as well. When I think about what the Psychological Society of Ireland has offered me in terms of me and my career, is being part of the division of work and organisation psychologists. So I meet other like-minded people that are also interested in helping others and making a difference. You get to benefit from meeting other people, and there are opportunities that come out of that. The organisation psychology field is quite small in Ireland, and so you find people that might be able to help. Everyone helps each other out in different ways, and just meeting other people can be really energising, and hearing what's happening in the global world of organisation psychology. And out of that, myself and another colleague, we set up a coaching psychology group, which is also like a special interest group that came out of organisational psychology. And that's kind of in its infancy. Coaching psychology brings together all the positive aspects of psychology, and it incorporates a lot of other people from other disciplines. So you have clinical psychologists, counselling psychologists, sports psychologists, educational, the whole realm of people that work within psychology
are interested in coaching.
There's a wide variety of SIGs in PSI, and they're always increasing. There's always new SIGs coming on board, and there's also SIGs that kind of disappear when there's, when people, I suppose, maybe there's less of an interest in them. Myself personally, I've actually been involved in the founding of two different SIGs. One is the special interest group in media art and cyber psychology known as SIGMAC, and the specialist interest group in pediatric psychology known as SIGPEP. SIGMAC is very much so involved in the psychology behind media, art, and human interaction with technology. The special interest group in pediatric psychology is very involved in children's health, well-being and illness. And the SIGs are a great opportunity for younger members of the society to get involved. Joining the SIG allows them to meet up with other psychologists who may be more experienced in that particular area. And it's almost like kind of dipping their toe in the water. They get involved and they get exposed to the latest research and thoughts and trends in whatever that particular area of psychology is. And you'll often see, younger psychologists who, initially get involved in a SIG go on to end up leading the SIG and end up, leading the PSI.
So before I started studying psychology, I didn't even know health psychology was a thing. So health psychology is all around psychology of physical health and wellness, where I guess I'd always assumed that psychology was more to do just with clinical psychology and mental health. So I think that's something maybe people don't know about psychology so much, is how diverse it is and how much it covers.
I think what we've noticed over the years is everybody has more of an interest in psychology and more of an understanding and more openness to things like counselling and psychotherapy. So everybody can see psychology is very relevant to our lives, and also things like the pandemic and other has made people go, well, actually we have a psychological life and we need psychological help. And psychology can really, I think, be a resource for people across the board, not just in terms of mental health and mental distress, but also positive mental health, flourishing, lifespan development, all these areas that are involved in becoming fully ourselves. Psychology can help with that as well, and that can be a more expansive role for psychology.
I think what the PSI can offer, even above and beyond that, is the practicalities. What are the pragmatic ways that the average person can be accessible to people? They can read about psychology, they can read about mental health support, and they can incorporate those things into their own lives. There doesn't have to be such a wide gap like there has been in the past. And I think that's wonderful. I think the PSI are working hard on closing that gap.
I've always been really interested in what makes people tick. And as a clinical neuropsychologist, I'm really interested in that link between our brain and behaviour. So in particular, I work with people who have acquired brain injuries. And I'm interested in understanding how, when there's an injury to the brain, what that means for that individual in their everyday lives in terms of how they function. So how they make a cup of tea, how they do their shopping. And I suppose as part of a rehabilitation team, I work to help individuals, I suppose, adapt to and adjust to the implications that an injury has had for them in their lives, to try and help them to cope as well as they can and return to the best life possible after injury.
I work as a clinical psychologist with patients with diabetes in hospital, and I usually ask them, what's your understanding of psychology? And to me, it is the scientific study of behaviour. I think it does really help with having that, bringing the evidence to using an effective way to get to actually, make life a bit better for people.
I suppose it's the science of how we look at people's behaviour and the function of behaviour in a social context. And then some of us go and experimentally see if we're right or wrong. Some of us socially see if we're right or wrong, and some of us then over history and time see if we're right or wrong.
Psychology to me is a wonderful, rich means of enhancing the quality of life of every man, woman and child, not just in Ireland, but in the world. And that it has many riches to offer, so that regardless of the circumstances of that man, woman or child, that their quality of life can be enhanced by the application of psychological knowledge.
think PSI at this point, after 50 years, is really good at the core job of supporting psychologists, supporting the profession, getting resources, ethics, policy. All of that now is going really well. It's expanded, which is great because expansion means more diversity. It's bringing in more young people, so it's becoming very vibrant, I think.
It seems a little bit more comfortable in its own skin as a professional organisation. People are better aware now of the challenges of running a volunteer organisation. I think they're more comfortable about what's involved in that, and that no council's ever going to have the right answer, and no council's ever going to be able to get everything right all the time, but they do a really good job most of the time. They keep it ticking over. A really complex organisation, actually, a big organisation ticking over with nobody paid other than a very few small numbers of people in the office who do an incredible job, and I hope they get a chance to hear their voice as well, because they're quietly keeping the whole system operating and functioning.
So I think for the future, what we need and what we want is for more and more people, especially young people today, to get involved with psychology, to study, because as more people get involved, the more we grow, the more we're able to present to the world a reality that sometimes is needed, and that I think the Psychological Society in particular is an organisation now where people trust, and they know after 50 years of always, number one, telling the truth and giving the evidence, that when the PSI speaks, it speaks with authority and it speaks with integrity.
Out of COVID, we saw a lot more psychologists stepping up politically in terms of advocacy and saying the things that need to be said and putting pressure on government and making our voices heard. And I think into the future, PSI is going to do a lot more of that. And I see a lot more of our younger psychologists taking other, probably from their point of view, brave steps and making their voices heard, and not worrying about whether this would impact them in terms of their career and being negative about stuff, because they're saying what needs to be said, and there's a lot more of that going to happen. PSI doesn't sit on the sidelines anymore, and I think it is going to be, and I think it is now, the voice for psychology in Ireland, and I think it's going to continue to be into the next 50 years.